Coming in at number 10. How ambitious were our ancestors when it came to hunting game? Apparently very, according to paleontologists who unearthed over 200 ancient mammoth skeletons beneath an airport construction site in Mexico City. Now we know humanity has been responsible for more than one extinction already, so it's not off the table with the skeletal find. The reason as to why so many bones have been found in the same place remains to be seen, however. But scientists propose two potential explanations. One, they went there of their own accord to graze the grass and have some lunch. Or they were chased into the mud because humans were hungry. Which one do you think is more likely? But going by the way I feel when I'm hungry, I'm definitely going with the latter. But still, who knows? Coming in at number 9, the discovery of Atlantis. Maybe? We all know the legend of Atlantis and have all dreamed about finding a lost city while snorkeling in the ocean or in our pools at home, or maybe that's just me, but scientists think that they may have found the origin of the famous legend. A group of islands in Santorini, Greece that roughly cover 120 miles could be all that's left of what was Atlantis. Plato said that the city was drowned by a massive wave, and researchers believe that it was indeed a tsunami that was triggered by the eruption of volcano Thera almost 3,500 years ago. Thera was the most powerful eruption ever witnessed, and the horror that came after it may have inspired the legend. Based on new evidence found on the seafloor off the coast of Caesarea, scientists now believe that this wave raced over 600 miles across Santorini. Anyone watching from afar would have witnessed the people and the architecture of the Minoan Empire dragged beneath the waves. Still, despite these discoveries, some even think that Atlantis resides in the Bahamas, or even Japan, or maybe in my pool in the backyard. I guess there's no harm in looking, so get your scuba gear ready. Next up, we have one for all the mummy fans. Coming in at number 8, we have the discovery of over 160 coffins discovered in Saqqara, Egypt this last year. The Saqqara necropolis is a burial ground in the ancient capital of Memphis that has been undergoing excavation for over 3 years. This is the first time these coffins have seen the light of day, or any other humans for that matter, in 2,500 years. One of the mummies, which was wrapped in cloth, was discovered through X-ray technology to be so well preserved that the entire inner structure was intact. Along with the mummies and sarcophagi, 40 artifacts have been found as well, including funerary masks and figurines. There is no doubt that there will be plenty more to reveal in the coming year, along with plenty more questions. Coming in at number 7, we're going all the way back 5,000 years ago. If you're a fan of Outlander or just tried and true mysteries altogether, you know about Stonehenge. But for those who don't, well, I'll just tell you. Stonehenge is an ancient circular structure of megaliths dating back all the way to 2500 BCE in Salisbury, Wiltshire, England. 92 stones, all ranging in size, make up the structure, but no one knows who built it for sure and where they come from. The smaller stones in the center, called blue stones, have been traced back to Wales, but up until last July, no one had any idea where the Silcrete Sarsen stones traced to. But according to an article published in July 2020, scientists now believe that these stones hail from Westwood, Wiltshire, around 25 kilometers north of the site. But the question still remains, how did they get to Salisbury? The Sarsen megaliths weigh individually around 50,000 pounds and somehow ended up 25 kilometers south of where they came from. Someone had to drag them there, but the question of who and how still remains. Now it's time to look to the sky. There are plenty of mysteries in the great beyond, and scientists can't get enough of them. If you've ever watched a science fiction show or TV show, then you're familiar with black holes as pretty effective plot devices. Coming in at number 6, we have the discovery of a new type of black hole, one based on a theory Einstein predicted 100 years ago. In 2020, researchers at Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, aka LIGO, announced that they had yet again discovered ripples in space-time. What? What does that mean? These ripples are called gravitational waves, which are a result of two massive objects colliding in space, i.e. black holes or neutron stars. The last recorded similar disturbance was in 2019, a result of two neutron stars, which are dense remnants of dead stars, colliding. But this time, they didn't find any sign of collision, which means that the theory of two neutron stars colliding and immediately forming a black hole can in fact happen. Einstein predicted this a century ago, though he never thought that we would be able to measure gravitational waves. Scientists still want to wait and accumulate more examples of the phenomenon before officially classifying classifying it as a new kind of black hole, but still, it definitely makes you wonder what other predictions have been made that are waiting out there to be discovered. Which brings me to number 5. The search for signs of life continues as scientists discover a substance produced by anaerobic microbes on Earth in Venus's atmosphere. Phosphine is often produced by volcanoes or lightning strikes, but with the amount they found in the atmosphere, it had to be made by something else. Anaerobic microbes also produce phosphine here on Earth, which gives scientists the idea that there could be some kind of life just next door. After more tests, however, it turns out that there wasn't nearly as much in the atmosphere as initially predicted. But even with a smaller amount, there's still a chance of life on Venus. I don't know about you, but I'm really looking forward to welcoming some new neighbors. But Venus may not be the only place to find life or even to home. Coming in at number 4, the exciting new discovery of water on Ceres, the largest dwarf planet located on the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Of course, scientists don't think that Earth can be our home forever, so we're always looking for new real estate, and we may have found one. In August 2020, NASA's Dawn orbiter captured images of water seeping onto the surface of Ceres. The search for a habitable planet with water is crucial when seeking out a potential new home, so of course this got scientists super excited. It's speculated that the water comes from a saltwater reservoir located 25 miles beneath Ceres' Okator crater. It could be hundreds of miles wide, and some scientists even speculate a reservoir the size of an ocean. Should the call arise, are you ready to pack your bags and go where few have gone before? But coming back down to our beautiful home we call Earth, we've got number 3 coming in very, very hot. We are getting closer and closer to number 1, and if you're enjoying these crazy universal finds, go ahead and click the like button and subscribe for more mysteries. This one really gets me excited, because according to a study published on January 28, 2020, we have now found the oldest recorded material on Earth to date. Scientists analyzed fragments of meteors in Australia that apparently contain stardust from 5 to 7 billion years ago. That's older than the oldest rock formations on the planet, which date to around 4.4 billion years. Why is this so exciting? Well, I'll tell you. The evidence found within these materials support a theory that the majority of the stars formed in an explosion over 7 billion years ago instead of gradually over time. It always blows my mind to think that life just exploded into existence. I mean, come on, how cool is that? So we've talked about potential new life on Venus and water on Ceres, but what about actual aliens? Are they out there? And better yet, already here? Well, among some of the weird crazy things that happened in 2020, someone may have let it spill that aliens do exist and they have been trying to contact us. Former Israeli space security chief says that aliens exist and that ex-President Trump knows about it. The former head of Israeli Defense Ministry's Space Directorate claimed that the unidentified flying objects have asked not to publish that they are here, but humanity is not ready yet. He also claims that the extraterrestrials are curious and want to understand the fabric of the universe. Ashed then goes on to say that President Trump was aware and was going to tell the world before being persuaded to keep the news to himself in order to prevent hysteria. I mean, like we didn't have enough to deal with in 2020. He also continues to say that there is an underground base in Mars which includes both American and alien representatives. This story sounds super insane and definitely too good to be true. So is it? Who knows? I guess we will find out for sure when the time is right. And last but not least, we have to end at number 1 on one of the biggest and creepiest mysteries of the universe that still have scientists baffled. Landing on number 1, let's talk about dark energy. The universe is said to be made from 5% actual matter and 25% dark matter. So what's the extra 70%? At the rate the universe is expanding, scientists think that the rest of the universe is a substance called dark energy. That sounds like a supervillain, a force with enough power to tear the universe apart. While dark matter tries to tie particles together, dark energy does the exact opposite. The idea of dark energy surfaced in 1998 when a supernova observed through the Hubble Space Telescope showed that the universe expanded at a slower pace in the past than it does today. Scientists then realized that in fact, gravity wasn't slowing down the expansion of the universe. In fact, it wasn't slowing down at all, it was accelerating, and they didn't know why or what was causing it. Einstein was the first person to realize that empty space was not nothing, and one explanation for what dark energy is the property of space. Theorists still don't quite know how to explain this, so for now they have given it the name of dark energy.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the bandy snake. Back in 2018, scientists were returning from a sea snake research mission in Queensland, Australia, when they found a brand new species of snake. Of course, this being Australia, land of things that can kill you, this one was venomous. This new species of bandy snake was a startling discovery because bandy is a burrowing snake, so those who found it were pretty surprised to have found it on a concrete block near the sea. It turns out this discovery almost didn't happen as well, as it was realized that this snake had come to that location after slithering over from a pile of rubble that was waiting to be loaded onto a ship. This snake is said to have been visually and genetically different from the other 5 known species of bandy snakes that live on the continent. And our number 9 spot today, we have the reticulated siren. Florida is the land of the weird, and this creature certainly is no exception. Scientists back in 2018 found this new species of legless salamander that looks kinda like a salamander, kinda like a snake with gills, and kinda like a leopard. This species is said to be among the largest found in the United States in the last century, so it is no doubt that this is quite the find. Researchers said that the creature is completely aquatic and has a long eel-like body, 2 forelimbs, no eyelids, gills, and a horny beak and a spotted pattern on its skin. What's funny is that, while unknown to science, this creature was locally known and it was referred to as a leopard eel. Scientists, while they appreciated the name, thought that they should change it to something more formal since this animal is neither leopard nor eel. In our number 8 spot today, we have the brittle star. This is a species that was found in 2011, but it took 10 years for it to be researched and fully classified, which happened just last year in 2021. This is a species of brittle star that was found during an expedition on the Banque Durand seamount, which is off of the coast of New Caledonia in the Pacific Ocean. This specific brittle star first caught the attention of experts because of 2 atypical features. One was that it had 8 arms. This was unusual because most have 5, and the other unusual feature is their 8 sets of razor-sharp teeth. It is believed that these teeth, which line every jaw, are used to snare and shred their prey. This creature definitely is quite remarkable and is the product of millions of years of evolution, but it is likely the last survivor of an ancient lineage which dates back to the Jurassic period. In our number 7 spot today, we have the zombie frog. This is a type of frog that was first described just last year in 2021. They can be found in French Guiana, and they are nocturnal creatures as well as being ones that primarily live underground. This is exactly what made their discovery so difficult. The frogs thankfully have a unique call sound, which is what allowed researchers to dig through the mud in the middle of the night in order to uncover these elusive creatures. Despite their scary common name, these frogs are not part of the undead. Their name actually comes from what the scientists said they all looked and felt like after digging through the mud all night trying to find these dang frogs. While these frogs and their populations need much more examination and research, it is currently thought that they might unfortunately be endangered. In our number 6 spot today, we have the sheet weaver spider. Until recently, these little spiders lived their lives deep inside a cave in Indiana, completely unbeknownst to science. These guys were described in 2018, and they are quite small at only about 2 millimeters long. They're like a sort of dusty yellow or tan color, and they are said to have black circles around their eyes. They are best known for their sheet web skills, which are these intricate, flat, tightly woven horizontal webs. The scientific names of these spiders was inspired by Dr. Julian Lewis, who is said to have assisted greatly in the discovery of this new spider species. It is said that this discovery marks the 15th species in the genus and the 5th known to live their lives only in caves. In our number 5 spot today, we have Jonah's mouse lemur. Mouse lemurs are, of course, a group of lemurs who are shy nocturnal primates. These animals are usually found in Madagascar and are the smallest group of known primates in the world, usually growing to around the size of a human fist. Back in 2020, scientists were able to discover a new kind of mouse lemur, which is now being called Jonah's mouse lemur. They were able to distinguish this new species from the others by using genomic data and mitochondrial DNA, as well as just its general appearance. These new ones are slightly bigger than average, and they have a reddish-brown body with white stripes on their nose, thick fur, and small little ears. So far, we have only found Jonah's mouse lemurs in a small lowland rainforest in northeast Madagascar. Madagascar. Unfortunately, with their discovery comes the realization that they are also endangered, which is actually the case for all lemurs, mouse or otherwise. The main threats to their life come from the deforestation currently happening within Madagascar and their natural habitats. In our number 4 spot today, we have the forest bumblebee. These little guys were found by researchers from Sweden in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. The reason they hadn't been previously discovered is because they look identical to another species of bumblebee that had already been discovered, but through genome sequences, we were able to finally realize that there is a distinguishable difference. This discovery has led researchers to believe that there may be even more undiscovered species of bumblebees than previously thought, as well as the fact that the warming of colder regions might be prompting the birth of new species. This is super cool because of course evolution is a thing that takes a lot of time, but it truly is happening all around us all of the time. Because this discovery came just last year, more research will soon be conducted to see just how many species of bumblebees we've been misidentifying. Maybe we're really close to learning about even more new ones. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Central African slender-snouted crocodile. This is a species that was discovered quite a while ago, but it wasn't until just a few years ago that it was realized to be its own species. After 2 main studies into this species, one in 2014 and one in 2018, this medium-sized freshwater species was classified to be the Central African slender-snouted crocodile. These guys can be found from Cameroon to Tanzania, but their discovery came with some bad news. Crocodile expert Matthew Shirley said, quote, "Recognizing the slender-snouted crocodile as actually comprised of 2 different species is cause for great conservation concern." He went on to say, quote, "We estimate only 10% of slender-snouted crocodiles occur in West Africa, effectively diminishing its population by 90%. This makes the West African slender-snouted crocodile one of the most critically endangered crocodile species in the world." While crocodiles are a bit of a scary creature themselves, nothing compares to the news of a newly discovered species being found and at the same time being known to be endangered. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Dragon of Death. Okay, so this discovery is a little different from the others on this list because unfortunately this creature is long extinct, but that doesn't mean its discovery isn't absolutely fascinating. This massive prehistoric creature has been dubbed the Dragon of Death as it once hunted prey from the sky around 86 million years ago. With its wings fully extended, this creature is said to have measured a massive 9 meters or 30 feet from one wingtip to the other. If that wasn't enough, it is also said that this species is as tall as a giraffe, so in just size alone, this creature is absolutely terrifying. While scientists believe that this creature spent most of its time on the ground, they also believe that it may have been one of the first predators to use its wings to hunt prey, as it lived and flew in a time before the evolution of birds. In our number 1 spot today, we have new nematodes. Back in September of 2019, a wholesale tarantula breeder, which for a second, let's just talk about how that sounds like the worst job in the history of jobs. Anyway, this guy contacted a parasitologist named Adler Dillman because there was a mysterious infection that was harming some of his tarantulas and he needed help figuring out what it was. The specimens who were sent for testing were found to have an odd white mass around their mouth area. This led to Adler recognizing these as nematodes. It is said that prior to this, scientists in Europe did identify the first nematodes found on tarantulas, but the research only examined the worms themselves and not the worms as found on the spiders. Adler was able to see this gap in the research and fill it in with some frightening information. Once infected by these worms, tarantulas will begin to exhibit strange behaviors. They will do things like walking around on their tiptoes, they won't eat, and the appendages that control their fangs will stop working. Tarantulas apparently don't need to eat a lot, so it may take a while, but this will eventually prove to be fatal, and the spider will starve to death as a result of these newly discovered worms. While we understand the effects, at this point in time what's left to understand is how these parasites are actually able to change the tarantula's behavior. Also, the scientific name of these guys is named after Jeff Daniels because of the fact that his character in the 1990 film Arachnophobia saves a town from a deadly infestation of spiders. So, who said that scientists don't have a sense of humor?
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Spider Rock art. In 2013, archaeologists were shocked to discover what can only be described as a wall of ancient spider art in the desert. It's the only known example of its kind from the old world. Dating has put the age of this to around 4,000 BC, that's over 6,000 years ago. The drawings depict spiders, their webs, and even ensnared prey. Historians have struggled to learn more about the people who actually drew these and their strange obsession with spiders. Some believe it's part of an ancient totemic ritual to combine the spider with the power of the sun. Sounds kind of terrifying. Next up at number 9 now, we have the sailing stones. For many years, scientists were baffled by a mysterious phenomenon in Death Valley, one of the hottest deserts in the world. Heavy stones seemed to be moving by themselves in the mud, leaving trails behind them. Sometimes they were straight, sometimes they were curvy, sometimes they just sharply changed direction. There were no footprints and no obvious ways that these stones were just moving across the desert floor. Theories sprouted up, including everything from magnetic fields to aliens or even the supernatural. Right now, the best scientific theory is that under certain winter conditions in Death Valley, enough ice and water can form to float the rocks across the muddy surface in a light breeze, leaving a trail of mud as they go. At number 8 now, we have the Band of Holes. In the Neza Plateau in Peru lie about 6,000 man-made holes. They begin at the edge of a valley and run up a hill for about 1.5 kilometers. Each one is about 1 meter in diameter and 50 centimeters deep. Here's the thing, locals have no idea how they were made. Archaeologists have been studying them for over 80 years now, trying to figure out their origin and their purpose. It's thought they were made by the Inca Empire, but theories have ranged for their existence from graves to storage sites. Moving on to number 7 now, we have desert glass. When scientists tested a scarab jewel that belonged to Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun, they were surprised to find the glass inside came from before the earliest Egyptian civilization, so this begs the question, where exactly did that glass come from? Eventually they found it came from a thin sheet of glass sprinkled across a huge part of the Sahara Desert. They calculated that this glass could only have been made by a meteor impacting the atmosphere and creating a huge fireball, cooking the sand below with temperatures of up to 18,000 degrees Celsius or 32,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Next up at number 6 now, we have the oldest pot stash in the world. In 2008, archaeologists found almost 2 pounds of marijuana in a 2,700-year-old grave in China's Gobi Desert. That age makes it the oldest stash of cannabis ever discovered. What exactly was it doing there in that grave? Well, according to Dr. Ethan Russo, it could have been for pain control or to aid in mystic divination. The stash is now being stored in the Turpan Museum in China. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the Maree Man. In the late 1980s, someone flying over a remote part of the South Australian desert spotted an image below. A huge hunter, naked and armed with a stick. It could either be a woomera or a boomerang. The man is 2.6 miles tall and is actually still visible today. Experts know it must have been made in modern times as there was no record of its existence before, but it's an absolute mystery as to who designed this thing. Many people have come forward claiming that it was them, but nothing is known for sure. At number 4 now, we have the fairy circles. Deep in the Namibian desert lie millions of strange fairy circles. The circles are devoid of any life, but the edges are surrounded by knee-high grass. Nothing will grow in the middle, even when fertilized soil is added. The circles can reach up to 20 meters in diameter and seem to have been evenly spaced out. They never overlap. They also seem to have a lifespan of at least 75 years. Right now, the leading explanation for their existence is different termite colonies who don't want to encroach on each other's territory. Next up at number 3 spot now, we have the plains. Now what's one thing you don't expect to find buried in an old desert? Plains. During the 2003 coalition invasion of Iraq, the US military was surprised by the lack of enemy planes there. Intelligence reports had said that Saddam Hussein had them before the war, so where exactly were they? A few months into the war, someone noticed a tail fin sticking out of the sand near a military base. After some digging, they found 30 brand new Iraqi planes. For whatever reason, Saddam had thought he could just bury these $1 million pieces of machinery in the sand and then just dig them up later. Didn't really go to plan. Coming at number 2 now, we have the Nabta Playa. Deep in the Sahara Desert, a Stone Age community built the Nabta Playa, a series of standing stones built 6,500 years ago. This makes them 1,000 years older than Stonehenge and the oldest astronomical alignment of its kind ever discovered. Some of the stones face in a north-south direction, others from east to west. This seems to tell archaeologists that it had some sort of astrological significance. Perhaps they were used to mark the summer solstice or the beginning of the rainy season, back when this desert received a lot more rain. Either way, the mysterious stones are so steeped in history that we may never know the full picture. And finally, number 1 now, we have the mysterious oasis. In 2014, shepherds in the Tunisian desert were shocked to find a huge, beautiful blue lake where there definitely wasn't one before. Before long, locals were arriving to enjoy the oasis and cool off in the extreme heat. The thing is, people aren't really sure where that lake came from. Some people point the finger at seismic activity causing groundwater to rise to the surface. What's even stranger though is that the water started out clear and then turned blue, and then after a few days it was green and filled with algae. The Public Safety Office there issued a public warning that the lake is dangerous and unfit for swimming, but the mystery of its origin continues.
Starting us off at number 10 is the monster study. In 1939, speech pathologists at the University of Iowa set out to prove their theory that stuttering was a learned behavior that was caused by a child's anxiety towards speaking aloud. So how did they go about testing this theory? Well, for starters, all the subjects were orphans, and they told these impressionable minds that they were going to be receiving speech therapy. From there, they split the 22 orphans down the middle, providing half of the subjects with positive reinforcement and praise of their speech fluency, while the other half was belittled for making any kind of speech imperfections. Essentially, the negative half was told that they were doomed to start stuttering once they began to speak, and then told that they were stuttering even if they weren't. So just straight up mind games. Once the seed was planted, they would sit down with the orphans and insist they did not speak unless they would be able to speak right, meaning without a stutter, despite the fact that most of them never stuttered to begin with. Eventually, the orphans began shutting down, some refusing to speak entirely, all based on a false accusation. The entire experiment caused an insane amount of psychological harm to the students, and some even developed speech impediments through the sheer gaslighting of being told they had one. Coming in at number 9 is the Milgram experiment. Named after the psychologist Stanley Milgram, who spearheaded the experiment, this study began in the summer of 1961 and looked at testing the limits of obedience. Many academics at the time wanted to take a look into what was at the core of an authoritative personality, and how someone could be swayed to commit something that they didn't want to do simply because they believed they had to. Once the study began, 2 groups were made. One group was assigned to be actors, and the other group was tasked with shocking the person in the room after they answered a question wrong. What group 2 didn't know was that group 1 was not actually being shocked, just acting as if they were. As it turns out, an incredibly high proportion of the subjects continued to shock the group despite thinking they were hurting them, simply because they felt they had no other choice. But later, another scientist thought the experiment needed to be amped up, as he hypothesized people could have felt the victims were faking it. This new study included real-life dogs as the subjects being shocked, and test subjects apparently openly wept while still following orders to shock the dogs. I mean, first of all, why bring the sweet puppies into this? And secondly, the psychological harm that was caused by these people feeling forced to harm others is just evil. Coming in at number 8 is Kurt Blohm. One of the many evil scientists during World War II was Kurt Blohm. And just like the rest of them, he too performed indescribable acts on the prisoners in hopes to further scientific understanding. Or at least, that's what was being said at the time. His main choice of torture was purposefully injecting the prisoners with cancer and typhus. But not because they were looking on how to cure it, no, they literally were looking on how to best cause it. The reason behind that was that Blohm was in charge of all biological warfare in the SS, and so his experiments aimed to find the best way to use these diseases against their enemies, debilitating them. I mean, bio-warfare as a whole is an insane concept. Like, just imagine researching how to best infect your enemies with an incurable disease in order to win a war. It's so wild to me. But what is truly mind-blowing about the whole situation is that despite being arrested and put on the doctor's trial for his evil doings in 1947, and admitting to what he had done, the US intervened in his prosecution for wartime atrocities and got him off the hook. From there, the US Army Chemical Corps hired him to work on biological warfare projects in their country. So not only did he get away with his evil experiments, he continued on with them for another country's benefit. Coming in at number 7 is J. Marion Sims. Widely regarded as the father of modern gynecology, Dr. Sims gained gained most of his fame from doing experimental surgeries on slave women in the mid-1800s. He's quite a controversial character in medical history for several reasons, because while he did provide advancements like the invention of the speculum and developed new surgical techniques for dealing with the female anatomy, he also performed on unconsenting slaves without anesthesia. And not to mention, the reason he didn't use anesthesia was not because it wasn't available to him. It was because he believed that the operations were, quote, not painful enough to justify the trouble. Further, there were several of his patients who suffered extreme complications. One woman almost died from sepsis after a sponge was left inside her, and another woman was performed on a total of 30 times. Many in the medical community have condemned his work as they feel he was manipulating the social institution of slavery to perform human experimentation, and that despite what he may have discovered, countless women were tortured in order to do so. Coming in at number 6 is Karl Klauberg. Another horrible scientist during World War II. Back in 1942, Klauberg approached Heinrich Himmler, who was a major figure in the German party at the time, and asked if he could receive a large number of women for research purposes. From there, his proposal was accepted, so off to the cruel camp he went. Once he was there, the so-called research began. I mean, truthfully, it was really more human torture under the guise of science. I'm sure you're wondering, just what was Klauberg experimenting? Well, he wanted to figure out how to sterilize women in the most cost-efficient way, so he would inject formaldehyde directly into their stomachs without any painkillers. He experimented on thousands of prisoners, but only 700 survived, although all were left sterile. Now, as I'm sure you can put together, the reason behind this forced sterilization had to do with eugenics, but on top of putting formaldehyde in the victims, he also mentally tortured his patients too. In order to make sure that the experiment had worked, he needed to inseminate them to make sure that they wouldn't conceive. But for an extra layer of cruelty, he would tell his patients that he injected them with animal sperm to try and create a monster. Coming in at number 5, the Tuskegee study. Back in 1932, the United States Public Health Service began to dive into the natural progression of syphilis if left untreated. And while that is very valuable knowledge to know about in order to prevent complications in the future, there are definitely better ways to go about it. In this study, 600 poor and illiterate men, of which only 399 previously had syphilis, were hired, and none were told about what the experiment was going to be for, or that they had a life-threatening disease to begin with. The 600 men were instead told that they were actually receiving free healthcare, meals, and burial insurance in exchange for participating. What's even more sick is that even though penicillin was proven to be an effective cure in 1947, the study continued all the way until 1972, essentially needlessly infecting hundreds of people and watching them die of a disease that already had a cure. It's just insane that this went on for so long, and it definitely is one of the most evil experiments to have seen the light of day. Coming in at number 4 is the Stanford prison experiment. Probably one of the most notorious experiments ever recorded is the 1971 Stanford experiment. In 1971, Philip Zimbardo set out to test the nature of human nature, specifically what happens when you put good people in evil situations. To do so, he set up a 2-week study and paid college students $15 a day to play guards and prisoners. The day prior to the official start, those assigned as guards were given an orientation and provided uniforms. The next day, those assigned as prisoners were mock arrested by the police, a detail that utterly blindsided participants, and taken to the jail for the study to begin. Immediately upon arrival, they were dehumanized, forced into a strip search, given an ID number, and sent to their cells. Nearly immediately, things got out of hand. By day 2, guards were harassing the inmates with psychological and physical abuse, and prisoners were attempting to rebel against their treatment, which only exacerbated the abuse, prompting the guards to strip the prisoners of their uniforms, take their mattresses, and force them to relieve themselves in buckets. On the 3rd day, alliances were being formed, offering rewards to prisoners with good behavior, and by the 4th day, full-on riots were breaking out. Things escalated so badly that the experiment ended on the 6th day, a whole week before it was scheduled to end. While incredibly controversial, the Stanford prison experiment has been the basis of psychologists and even historians' understanding of how even healthy people can become evil when placed in certain situations. Next up at number 3 is the Willowbrook experiments. In the 1950s, one institution ran a very, very dark experiment that I honestly can't quite believe was able to happen even then. The institution was for young disabled people, specifically those deemed to have a mental illness or a mental disorder at the time, and due to highly unsanitary conditions in the institution, many contracted hepatitis. You would think this would maybe make them go, maybe we should tidy up around here, protect those that are under our care. But that was not quite their approach. Instead, Dr. Sal Krugman proposed an experiment to try and develop a vaccine. Now, while I can appreciate the thought that was behind his proposition, rather than testing on the already contracted citizens, they actually began purposefully infecting people with the disease to assist in the experiment. Now, don't get it twisted, there were many folks against this from the start, but ultimately parents of the admitted people gave their permission to affect them and use them in the study, so forth they went. Kind of crazy to believe that someone would actually go along with that, but apparently they didn't seem to care too much about infecting disabled people with a deadly disease. So there you have it. Coming in at number 2 is Dr. Sigmund Rascher. As we have covered by this point, there were many evil scientists researching cruel experiments during World War II, and one of the worst doctors of the time was Dr. Sigmund Rascher. When he joined the army, he asked the leader if human subjects could be provided at his disposal, and by 1942 his wishes were granted. He began conducting experiments in pressure chambers where he would simulate a high altitude and then quickly alter the pressure to simulate the conditions of a pilot free falling with no oxygen. But he was most well known for his cruel freezing experiments on 300 prisoners, supposedly to figure out the best way to warm up soldiers who experienced hypothermia. He would either force his victims to remain outdoors, completely naked in freezing temperatures for up to 14 hours, or would place them in tanks of ice for 3 hours, measuring their pulse and internal temperatures all the while. From there, they would warm up their victims, experimenting with a variety of different temperatures, including boiling water, often causing further harm. Along with his other forms of torture, Sigmund would also administer polygal, a substance to aid in blood clotting, and then shoot or amputate a limb on his victim to see the speed at which they would bleed out. I mean, you have to wonder what happens to someone in their life to make them this cruel and evil. And last up today in our number 1 spot is Shiro Ishii and Unit 731. During the 30s and 40s, notorious microbiologist and surgeon Shiro Ishii led the development and application of biological warfare for the infamous Unit 731. Shiro had long awaited to develop biological warfare, something that was against the Geneva Convention at the time, so in 1936, when he was promoted to senior army surgeon and granted full control over Unit 731, Shiro Ishii unleashed all evil. With no one to tell him no, Ishii began his evil experiments on live humans, as he believed he could not get the results he was looking for by testing on animals. Ishii was notorious for injecting his subjects with deadly diseases under the guise of vaccines so that he could watch and study the effects if left untreated, leaving his victims suffering horrifying symptoms and eventually letting them die. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. Victims of his evil experiments would also have limbs amputated and reattached to other parts of their bodies while conscious and without the use of any anesthesia, or be put into pressure chambers until their eyes literally escaped their skull. It's estimated that nearly 10,000 people died at the hands of Shiro Ishii's cruel experiments. But perhaps most insane of all is that after the war ended, he was never charged with any war crimes, as he traded the information obtained from his experiments for immunity and lived out the remainder of his life in Japan a free man.
In our number 10 spot, we have Brendan Fraser and Josh Hutcherson on their journey to the center of the earth. Just kidding! In our number 10 spot, we have the Atlantis Massive Drill. On a journey to the center of the earth through the seafloor, you would first go through the sediment and then a layer of basalt, and then you would hit the gabbroic layer, which is the layer directly above the mantle. We have gone through
through to this layer before, but because of the fact that the basalt is hard to get through, it's not done often. In 2010, a team of scientists led by Stephen Giovanni of Oregon State University drilled down into the Atlantis Massif. This spot was chosen specifically because of the fact that the tectonic activity below this submerged mountain caused the gabbroic layer to be pushed up within 70 meters of the sea floor, which made this spot the easiest to reach. So, on this mission, the team was able to drill 1,391 meters down where the temperatures reach 102 degrees Celsius, and here they found life. They found communities of bacteria that were quite a surprise. Stephen had previously found life in the form of microorganisms at the basalt layer during previous research missions, and it was expected that a similar type of life would be found here, but it was actually very different. At the moment, it is believed that this bacteria may have found its way down there from more shallow regions rather than having evolved inside of the crust. In our number 9 spot today, we have a mountain range. What if I told you that you currently might be unknowingly standing on top of a mountain? An inside Earth mountain, of course, which I'm sure is the sciencey term for it. Subterranean mountains exist beneath our feet as a part of the layered structure that exists inside of our beautiful Earth. Scientists were able to get a better look at these mountains using the seismic waves from multiple big earthquakes, and based on the most recent evidence, they know that not only are some of these mountains taller than Mount Everest, but they are also extremely rugged mountains. I know these mountains don't sit in the crust and instead exist in a transition zone between the upper and lower mantle, but we had to talk about them today still. Discoveries like this are super important because they can give scientists insight onto how the planet formed and how it functions. It might also give us some clues as to why the Earth is a bit of a chemical oddball in terms of planets. In our number 8 spot today, we have blobs. About 1,000 kilometers into the Earth, the layers there are being torn apart by the rising plumes of hot rock. You know, regular inside the Earth stuff. But under these plumes, there are 2 strange blobs, about the size of Australia. Again, I know this one's a little too deep to be in the crust of the Earth, but mysterious blobs inside the Earth need to be talked about. We can't just ignore something like that. These blobs sit at the bottom of the rocky mantle just outside of the molten outer core. They're made of rock like the rest of the mantle is, but they are much more hot and much more dense, and if we can figure out more about them, they could hold some pretty important answers about the history of our planet. The blobs were first spotted in the 1970s, and since then they truly have been baffling to scientists. One of the blobs is underneath Africa and the other is under the Pacific Ocean. Right now, the main debate over these blobs is what exactly they are made of, but that is difficult to answer since we can't ever go there to find out. Maybe one day we'll be able to. In our number 7 spot today, we have the 5th layer. We're traditionally taught that the Earth has 4 main layers: the crust, the mantle, the outer core, and the inner core. I mean, at least this is what I was taught, but there is a team from the Australian National University who, last year, confirmed the existence of what is being called Earth's innermost inner core. The idea of this layer had been around for a while, but the data to prove it was previously lacking. Through observing the data of how seismic waves travel through the Earth, they were able to detect this new innermost core, and although it is quite difficult to observe, this discovery may give insight into a previously unknown dramatic event that took place in the history of Earth's existence. Geophysicist and study lead Joanne Stevenson said, "We found evidence that may indicate a change in the structure of iron, which suggests perhaps 2 separate cooling events in Earth's history. The details of this big event are still a bit of a mystery, but we've added another piece of the puzzle when it comes to our knowledge of the Earth's inner core." In our number 6 spot today, we have an ancient seabed. A seabed that once was located at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean was found buried hundreds of miles beneath China. This slab of rock once found its home at the top of the lithosphere, which is the outermost layer of the surface of the Earth. How did it get hundreds of miles below China? Well, it got pushed down by a neighboring tectonic plate in what is called a subduction event. This discovery was so notable because scientists had never detected a subduction event so deep within the surface of the planet. When they found this rock slab, it was still continuing its descent towards the mantle of the Earth. I wonder if one day it will ever come back to the surface again. In our number 5 spot today, we have old crust. Speaking of what I just said, we've got to talk about the vanishing crust of the Earth. I mean, we just talked about finding old outer layers of the the Earth descending down into the planet, but what happens to this crust? Researchers have now provided evidence that shows that while Earth's crust is mostly made up of new materials, there is a percentage of it that is ancient chunks that once sunk down to the mantle, only to later resurface. This led them to also discover that based on the amount of the crust that was recycled, the planet would have had to have been creating crust since its formation 4.5 billion years ago, which contradicted the previous theories. Like, I wonder if the crust we're standing on right now is the same crust that the dinosaurs stood on. Maybe that's scientifically inaccurate, but it's kind of a cool thought. In our number 4 spot today, we have ultra low velocity zones. These guys are called ULVZs for short. Yes, I'm Canadian. And these are patches on the core mantle boundary that have extremely low seismic velocities. So remember when we were talking about the blobs and how they use seismic activity to find them? Well, the zones where the blobs are slow velocity zones. So what could be in the areas where there's ultra low velocity? These zones are mapped as being hundreds of kilometers in diameter and tens of kilometers thick, and their shear wave velocities can be up to 30% lower than the areas surrounding them. It is currently hypothesized that these zones are either enriched in iron, partially molten, or a combination of the two. Or perhaps they are a result of the presence of carbon. Again, it's one of those things that is super hard to observe when you can't actually go down and check it out. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Earth's core. Okay, we're talking about the core again. I know, not the crust, but the discovery of the age of the core of the Earth is something we have to talk about. The solid inner core of the Earth is a 2,442 kilometer ball of iron that has now been estimated to have formed 1 billion to 1.3 billion years ago. Scientists were able to recreate the conditions found in the core on a teeny tiny scale, and this allowed them to be able to calculate how long it would take for a blob of molten iron to build up to the core's current size. The window of time that they found lined up nicely with the known changes and fluctuations in the magnetic field of the Earth, which increased greatly in strength about 1 billion to 1.5 billion years ago. It is possible that the crystallization of the inner core may have been responsible for the strengthening of the magnetism because the process would have released heat into the outer core, and this heat would drive the churning motion of the liquid, which would then power the magnetic field. This discovery came just last year in 2020, and it absolutely rocked the scientific community. I just love science. In our number 2 spot today, we have an ocean. Researchers from Northwestern University and the University of Mexico report that there is evidence that there may be oceans worth of water deep below the United States. Well, not exactly liquid water as we know it up here, but the water is located within the rock deep inside the mantle of the Earth, and this just may be the Earth's largest water reservoir. Part of what makes our planet so livable is the liquid water on our surface, and for a long time researchers have been trying to figure out just how much water exists on our Earth, and that includes both the oceans we see and the reservoirs we can't. These researchers found deep pockets of magma about 400 miles beneath North America, and this is thought to likely be a signature of the presence of water. This discovery would suggest that water from the surface can be brought down deep into the Earth by tectonic plates, where it will then eventually cause the partial melting of rocks within the mantle. This discovery is extremely helpful in finding answers to the question of the vast amounts of water on our planet and where the missing deep water has been. For a long time, scientists have speculated that there is water trapped in the rocky mantle, but this is the first time someone has been able to show some direct evidence of that. In our number 1 spot today, we have structures. It has become abundantly clear to me that seismic waves are an extremely important part of the discoveries from within the Earth. Using a machine algorithm that was actually intended to analyze distant galaxies, researchers were able to instead learn something about what was going on inside of our own planet. Using this technique, they found 2 separate unidentified structures deep within our Earth. One is located under the Marquesas Islands and had never been previously detected, while the other is located beneath Hawaii, and it was found to have been much larger than what was previously thought. The first one I mentioned was found because it was in a mega ULVZ zone, and it is believed that both of these structures are made up of some sort of exotic materials that date all the way back to a time before the Earth even had a moon. That's crazy. An Earth with no moon on it is not an Earth I want to live on. It is thought that these structures might be partially melted material that comes from at least 4 billion years ago. This showed that it is possible mega ULVZs might host primitive geochemical signatures that have been relatively untouched since formation.
Number 10.
moon trash. Yep, us humans don't only litter on our beautiful Earth, but on the moon as well. Over time, the astronauts who visited the moon managed to leave quite a bit of trash behind. It's estimated that there's 181,437 kilograms, about 400,000 pounds of man-made materials lying around on the moon. Now, to make you feel better, it's not like the astronauts have been purposely littering the place and throwing sandwich wrappers and banana peels everywhere. Most of the garbage is debris from various experiments, space probes, and lunar rovers. Some of it, in fact, is still functional today, and I guess it's easier just leaving it there than bringing it back on the spaceship and back to Earth, but I feel like they should just make a storage shed for this kind of stuff, you know? Just not leave it on the ground. There is also some real trash though, however, such as astronaut poop containers. Yes, poop containers, which is just gross. Number 9. The moon is a burial ground. For those of you who didn't know, including myself until today, there is a dead body on the moon. Well, sort of. Eugene Jean Shoemaker, a famous astronomer and geologist, was something of a legend in his field. He invented the scientific research of cosmic impacts and came up with methods and techniques that Apollo astronauts used to reach the moon. Jean wanted to be an astronaut himself, but was turned down because of a minor medical issue. Throughout his life, this remained his biggest disappointment, but every day he kept on dreaming that he would someday visit the moon. Then, when he died, NASA fulfilled his most precious wish, and on July 31st, 1999, some of his ashes were carried to the moon by the Lunar Prospector space probe in a capsule designed by Carol Porco. Jean is the only person whose remains have been placed on any celestial body outside Earth. The brass foil wrapping of his memorial capsule is inscribed with images of Comet Hale-Bopp, the last comet that he and his wife observed together, the Barringer meteor crater, and a quotation from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, reading, "And when he shall die, take him and cut him out in little stars, and he will make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night, and pay no worship to the garish sun." His ashes remain there today, scattered amongst moon dust. And I'm not gonna lie, this is really cool. Number 8. Moon shadows. When Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin first walked the moon, they made a jarring discovery. The shadows of the moon were far darker than those on Earth due to the lack of atmosphere. Everything the sun didn't shine directly on was pitch black. Once their foot stepped in a shadow, they could not see it anymore, despite the fact that the sun was blazing in the sky. Now, that sounds terrifying. Although they soon found out they could adjust to the shadows, the constant contrast between dark shadow areas and sunny ones remained a challenge. Things got even stranger when they noticed that some of the shadows, namely their own, had halos. They later learned the eerie experience was caused by the opposition effect, a phenomenon that makes certain dark shadowed areas appear surrounded by a bright light when they're viewed in a certain angle to the sun. In general, the shadows of the moon caused mischief on many Apollo missions. Some astronauts found their maintenance tasks impossible because their own hands blocked out what they were doing, while others thought they were landing on a steep slope because of the deep shadows that seemed like a cavern. Number 7. The moon has its own time zone. If you've ever wondered, can astronauts tell time on the moon? The answer is yes, it is possible to tell time on the moon. In fact, back in 1970, Hellbros Watches asked Kenneth L. Franklin, who for many years was the chief astronomer at New York's Hayden Planetarium, to design a watch for moonwalkers that measures time in what he calls lunations, the period it takes the moon to rotate and revolve around the Earth, and each lutation is exactly 29.530589 Earth days. For the moon, Kenneth developed a system called the Lunar Mean Solar Time, or Lunar Time, LT. He envisioned local lunar time zones similar to the standard time zones of Earth, but based on meridians that are 12 degrees wide, opposed to the 15-degree intervals on Earth. A lunar hour was defined as a lu hour, and delilune hours, centilune hours, and millilune hours were also introduced. Interestingly, one moon watch was sent to the President of the United States at the time, Richard M. Nixon, who sent a thank you note to Kenneth. The note and another moon watch were kept in a display case at the Hayden Planetarium for several years, and quite a few visitors would openly wonder why Nixon was presented with a wristwatch that could be only used on the moon, and I have the answer. It's because it's cool. I mean, you're telling me if you could have a moon watch, you would say no? Number 6. the moon has varying temperatures. If you look on the internet for the temperature data on the moon, you're going to run into quite a bit of confusion. There's little consistency even within a given website in which temperature scale is quoted, Celsius, Fahrenheit, and even Kelvin. The temperature at the lunar equator ranges from an extremely low -280 degrees Fahrenheit, aka -173 degrees Celsius at night, and a very high 260 degrees Fahrenheit, aka 127 degrees Celsius in the daytime. In some deep craters near the moon's poles, the temperatures are always near -400 degrees Fahrenheit, -240 degrees Celsius. During a lunar eclipse, as the moon moves into the Earth's shadow, the surface temperature can plunge about 500 degrees Fahrenheit and 300 degrees Celsius in less than 90 minutes. Number 5. Moon dust. Yes, the moon is dusty. Moon dust sounds cool, but it's actually one of the moon's most surprising dangers. As everyone knows, sand gets everywhere on Earth, but on the moon, it's downright hazardous. Lunar dust is as fine as flour, yet extremely rough. Thanks to this texture and the moon's low gravity, it clings to absolutely everywhere. NASA has experienced numerous problems caused by moon dust. It has eroded astronauts' boots almost completely through and sandpapered their visors. It has traveled inside ships with spacesuits and caused moon hay fever in the poor astronauts that have inhaled it. It's thought that prolonged exposure to the stuff could even cause airlocks to fail and spacesuits to break down. And in case you're wondering, yes, of course, this devilish substance smells like spent gunpowder. Number 4. The moon's origin. Where did the moon come from? The short answer is that we don't really know. However, science has been able to come with a few educated guesses. There are 5 main theories about the origin of the moon. The fission theory argues the moon used to be a part of our planet that was separated at some very early point in Earth's history. This would make the moon part of what is currently the Pacific Ocean basin. The capture theory says that the moon was just wandering the universe until our gravitational field caught it. Other theories say our satellite was either condensed from a bunch of asteroids or the remains of Earth's collision with an unknown Mars-sized planet. Currently, the most likely candidate for the moon's origin story is the ejected ring theory, which is better known as giant impact theory. According to this version, a protoplanet, a planet that is forming called Theia, collided with Earth, and the ensuing cloud of debris eventually condensed into the moon. Number 3. Lunar anomalies. Some of the pictures taken by various vessels that have visited the moon have shown some very strange things on its surface. Many of these images seem to show artificial constructs that range from tiny canister-like shapes to the Shard, which appears to be a towering structure that could be at least 1.6 kilometers, aka 1 mile tall. According to paranormal enthusiasts, there's even a large castle that is suspended high above the surface of the moon. All of this seems to point toward an advanced civilization that has lived on the moon and built complicated structures. Now, NASA has never really bothered to debunk these strange theories, so does that mean that there's some truth to them? NASA? I need answers. Number 2. Moon music. Sound needs a medium to travel, and thus it cannot be heard in the vacuum of space, yet astronauts have returned to Earth with fascinating tales of hearing odd noises while in space, which is terrifying. During the Apollo 10 mission, which was a test run for sending the first men to the moon, astronauts were carrying various equipment with them, which was being tested to withstand space as they were deemed essential for the moon landing. While circling the moon, the astronauts on the vessel heard a certain whistling sort of music. The music lasted for almost an hour and creeped the living daylights out of the astronauts, which rightfully so. One of them described the sound as sort of otherworldly music. On returning to Earth, the astronauts struggled for a while on whether or not to tell NASA and the rest of the world about what they experienced. Later, astronaut Michael Collins, who was also part of the Apollo 11 mission with Aldrin and Armstrong, revealed hearing similar music while on Moon's surface. An engineer from the US Space Agency said that the noises likely came from interference caused by radios within the lunar and command modules. However, Al Worden, an astronaut on Apollo 15, disputed the explanation. And coming in at number 1 is the lost recording. When astronaut Neil Armstrong took a walk on the moon and became the first man to do so in 1969, many conspiracy theories came to light. For one, people claimed he didn't actually go to the moon and that the footage was recorded in a studio. Of the many conspiracy theories surrounding this moment, there's one that remains a mystery to date. During the Apollo 11 mission, after Neil landed on the moon, NASA claims to have lost transmission for roughly 2 minutes. And in a reportedly secret message to NASA, Neil said, "These babies were huge, sir, enormous. Oh my god, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecrafts out here lined up on the far side of the crater's water's edge, they're on the moon watching us. Now that sounds absolutely terrifying, and whether this is true or not, the fact that NASA lost transmission with Neil for 2 minutes is scary within itself. Being out in space, on a different planet, disconnected from everyone, and being completely alone sounds so scary.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the discovery of penicillin. Sometimes miracles happen when nobody is looking. That's the key. Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin back in 1928. At the time, he was actually studying Staphylococcus, which is a bacteria that causes infections and boils and all that nasty stuff. But right before Alexander left for a 2-week vacation, he left a petri dish with some of that Staphylococcus behind. He left it on the lab table rather than stored away in an incubator. Now, during his well-needed time off, a penicillium mold spore just drifted in there magically, either through the window, up the lab stairwell, some Horton Hears a Who type commute, and the temperature of the room and lack of one Alexander Fleming allowed for the mold to fight back, furthermore preventing that bacteria from growing. He literally changed the world. He discovered this antibacterial substance, and it was only produced by the strains of penicillium. Thank you, because or else we'd be a little uncomfortable. Number 9, mass extinction. Are we part of the 6th extinction? Is it happening right now all around us? Most likely. We lose thousands of species each year, and when looking in the past, asteroids and ice ages, sure, they have all something to do with massive extinction level events, of course, but after humans invented the wheel and then discovered fire, things started to change. We kind of caused a lot of bad stuff. In the 1800s, industrialization drove up extinction rates and continues to do so. According to Elizabeth Colbert, across the world, scientists every day are monitoring what could be the largest extinction event since the dinosaurs. That's us, since the dinosaurs. It's like dinosaurs, T-Rex, and then us, equally as bad. What do you know? Arms are a bit longer now, but still, we're up to no good. The way human beings interact with the environment and affect biodiversity could be more deadly than an asteroid hitting the Earth. That's pretty eye-opening. With an ever-climbing list of endangered species, Colbert and the world asked one question. Is it too late to change it? Like, are we screwed? Most likely, but we can do our best at this point. Okay, let's move on to something a bit lighter so we don't feel like complete trash. Sounds good, let's do it. Number 8, monkey business. Okay, this study done back in 2016, I had to include it because in a list of unsettling things, this definitely fits. This is the most unsettling thing I've ever heard in my life. And yeah, that includes finding out you're part of a mass extinction level event. This one's right beside it. You ever see Planet of the Apes? The voice acting, the motion capture, Andy Serkis, he kills it. All those dots on his face, really good. The voice, nails it. It's like Caesar, it's very deep. I can't even do it. If I did, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd be doing Planet of the Apes movies. Well, it turns out in real life, they would sound even scarier than that. Research done back in 2016 showed that macaques have a vocal tract capable of speaking. The lucky thing is they just don't have the brain power to do so, or else they would sound like this. Didn't hear it? Let's hear it again. Will you marry me? That's the scariest thing. Imagine a macaque saying that to you. I would politely say, no thank you. I'd be like, no, I'm good, man, thanks. Also, your voice is so deep. Is that laryngitis? What's that? Some vitamins. I was doing fine before I heard this, so I had to bring you down with me. You're welcome. Hit that thumbs up, and also, will you marry me? Number 7, human sacrifice. Archaeology is fascinating, but the deeper we deep into the earth, the more we find out about our past. Most of the time, that's not so fun. Our past is pretty shady. Usually these findings are horrible. Not too long ago, we found the remains of a 3,000-year-old skeleton in Greece. They found the skeleton on the side of Mount Lycaon, which historians know as the site of animal sacrifice for Zeus. Ancient writers mention the site and how human sacrifice was also at play, and thanks to technology, we can now confirm that this is indeed the case, sadly. The upper part of the skull was missing, and the body was laid on 2 lines of stones, so it wasn't accidental. There were even stones laid on their pelvis, so something was going on. We look at Greece, of course, as the birthplace of philosophy, democracy, and 100-meter hurdles, and, you know, the 100-meter dash, all the Olympic stuff, that's great. But they also did some sacrificial, shady shit in their off time when they weren't slamming some Merlot. Science has allowed us to take a look all over the world as well, not just Greece. Ancient Egyptians, Aztecs, sometimes after Mayan ball games, sometimes the losing team would just be sacrificed. Yeah, good game, good game, good game, good game. Are we getting sacrificed? No, okay, good. Good game, good game, good game. Everyone talks about how awful humans are now. No, we were pretty bad always, even before we knew how to speak words or what the sun was or what the moon was. We're like, you know what? I don't know what any of this is, but all I do know is that we gotta kill each other. Number 6, whale cancer. The big C, oddly enough, doesn't affect big fish. What do you know? Well, we do know that the risk of cancer increases as you age, but the amount of cells that you have surely has something to do with it, right? So large animals like whales, obviously they have a few more cells laying around. They're a bit husky, they're a bit bigger. You would think that the odds of whales getting cancer would increase, but the reality of it is that whales and dolphins are way less susceptible to cancer than us humans. We still have no idea why. Maybe it's because whales sing a lot? I don't know, maybe if we sing to each other instead of talking and killing, we can maybe beat cancer. I don't know. Worth a shot. Let's just start singing like whales. That's how we'll communicate from now on. We'll just go, and then someone else will be like, good, thank you. Number 5, MK Ultra. This one always gives me the chills. Many of you have probably heard of this at some point, but if not, well, buckle up. MK Ultra was a secret CIA project that lasted from 1953 to 1973, where they ran hundreds of experiments to US citizens without them knowing, and they gave them LSD, narcotics, anything in attempts to crack mind control, or as they called it, information gathering. It's like when Apple's like, yeah, we're just gonna gather some info real quick. When you talk to Facebook, we're just gonna gather some information. They're spying, definitely. It's bad shit. In the 50s and 60s, around the Cold War, the United States believed that the Soviets, Chinese, and or the North Korean agents were using mind control. I mean, sure, how else could you explain brainwashed prisoners of war in Korea, right? That's gotta be the only explanation as to why they're acting that way. Nothing else to do with it. The program had subjects take LSD, hallucinogens, they had electric shock therapy at one point, horrible stuff and all, and it was being done in universities, hospitals, and prisons. The happenings of this project weren't fully known to the public until years after it ended, but the agency destroyed most MK documents back in 1973 when it ended, so we think we know, when in reality, we probably know nothing, Jon Snow. Number 4, skin problems. This is a specific case that I had to share. A Russian lady found a small lump below her eye, her left eye to be specific, and at first she didn't think much of it, but eventually this lump was gone, which is a good sign, but then a new lump had appeared later on. This time it was on her lip. Odd. So when she went to go see a doctor about this lip problem, which is new and the eye problem's now gone, they removed a Dirofilaria repens, which is a thin worm, crawls around in the face. Hence why the bump was disappearing and then reappearing later on. It was moving around. I just got goosebumps talking about that. Now normally this type of worm only affects animals, dogs, cats, foxes, anything like that. They spread through mosquito bites as well. So next time you're in the woods smacking your arms, I dare you to not think of this. Good game. Number 3, particle accelerator. This list is full of unsettling things. I mean, I hope. I think they're pretty batshit insane, but this next one actually concerns me about our future. I don't mess with science. The at-home volcano trick where you like put in the vinegar and it goes poof, I don't do that. That's even scary for me. What if one experiment could hypothetically swallow our known universe? Would we do it? Sure, sounds fun. Why not? What have we got to lose at this point? Sir Martin Rees, Britain's royal astronomer, shines some light on a dark possibility in his book titled On the Future. The particle accelerator is this massive machine that does exactly that. It smashes these charged particles together at a high speed, all in the name of science. We're trying to further understand condensed matter physics, and while it sure sounds impressive, what if it goes south? What would happen? Well, it could destroy the world, apparently. These particles smashing together could create this strange matter that shrinks Earth down to 300 feet in diameter. Or it creates a black hole, one of the two. A black hole would just suck away all of our existence, or we'd be little tiny people. Thanks, Martin. Now I won't be able to sleep because I'm thinking of particle colliders and Freddy Krueger. Both are equally as haunting. Number 2, no more insects. This one I wish I didn't know. Ignorance is bliss, folks. But we're kind of doomed. No easy way to say it. And so is the bug spray industry, apparently. The world is losing insects, which if you're a little kid or if you're me, sounds like a good thing at first. I don't like bugs. Any bugs. But when scientists tell us that the world has 70% less bugs than it did back in just the 80s, well, that's pretty concerning. Unsettling things scientists don't want us to see. I mean, this one they probably don't mind us taking a peek into. But we don't talk about this nearly enough. These buggy dudes are vital for our crops. The movie Interstellar, for example, is about our future and future humans running out of crops. So we should have been listening to Christopher Nolan this entire time. I knew it. Go watch Dark Knight, there's probably some clues in there somewhere. We're too focused on robots gaining the ability to do parkour that we're forgetting the sad science as well. And finally, coming in at number 1, mad cow disease. While we've got our hands full of this COVID madness, let me just add another one there to top you up. I stumbled across this Reddit thread here. It was titled, Scientists of Reddit, what are some scary scientific discoveries that most of the public is unaware of? Yeah, I read through a bunch of them, pretty scary, but I found this gem and had to finish the list off. One reply got lots of feedback, tons of support as well, and there's a great deal of people who just may be carrying around mad cow disease. But we won't know for another decade, give or take. So, sit tight. Stay tuned, I guess. Mad cow disease from the 80s and 90s was due to cows being fed the remains of other animals. Pretty horrible stuff. People then ate their beef and consumed prions, a protein that can destroy the human brain, and it's thought that many people still might carry prions but won't know until they start experiencing the symptoms, which could be 10 to 50 years after consuming said contaminated meat. It has a really long incubation period, and you can also contract the prions from blood transfusions, which is the reason why so many UK citizens from that time period still aren't allowed to donate blood. Fun fact, this is a very real thing. And to answer your question, no, there is no cure, and it can kill you in just a few months. How's that for unsettling?